Around 2,800 years ago, a blind poet named Homer composed two of the most important epic poems in human history. The first, the Iliad, tells the story of the Trojan War. For 10 years, the Greeks and the Trojans fought, without either side gaining a decisive victory. Troy's massive walls seemed impossible to breach, and capturing the city appeared hopeless. Then, the King of Ithaca, Odysseus, came up with an extraordinary plan that would change history forever. The Greeks built a gigantic wooden horse and secretly hid their finest warriors inside. The rest of the army boarded their ships and sailed away, pretending to abandon the war. Believing they had finally won, the Trojans pulled the mysterious horse into their city as a symbol of victory. That night, while the city slept, the Greek soldiers hidden inside the horse quietly emerged, opened the city gates, and allowed the returning Greek army to enter. By sunrise, Troy had fallen. This brilliant strategy became known throughout history as the Trojan Horse, forever establishing Odysseus as one of the greatest military strategists of all time. But Odysseus's greatest challenge was only just beginning. No one could have imagined that the man who outsmarted Troy would soon have to battle gods, monsters, and fate itself just to find his way home. He believed that returning from Troy to his beloved wife Penelope and his son Telemachus would take only a few weeks, or so he thought. As Odysseus and his men sailed home, they landed on an unfamiliar island inhabited by the Cyclopes. Driven by curiosity, Odysseus and his companions entered the cave of one of these giants, a cyclops named Polyphemus. When Polyphemus returned, he sealed the entrance with an enormous boulder, trapping them inside. Then, one by one, he began devouring Odysseus's men. But Odysseus refused to give up. He came up with another clever plan. First, he offered the Cyclops a strong wine. When Polyphemus asked for his name, Odysseus replied, "My name is Nobody." After the giant fell into a drunken sleep, Odysseus and his men sharpened a wooden stake in the fire and drove it into the Cyclops' single eye. Blinded and screaming in agony, Polyphemus called out to the other Cyclopes for help. When they asked who had attacked him, he shouted, "Nobody!" Believing that no one had harmed him, the other Cyclopes simply walked away. The next morning, Odysseus and his men escaped by clinging beneath the bellies of the giant's sheep as they left the cave. But their victory came at a terrible cost. Thinking he was finally safe, Odysseus let his pride get the better of him. As his ship sailed away, he shouted his real name back at Polyphemus. Enraged, the Cyclops raised his hands to the sea and prayed to his father, Poseidon, the god of the sea, begging him to curse Odysseus. Continuing their journey, Odysseus and his crew arrived at the island of Aeolus, the god who ruled over all the winds. Impressed by Odysseus, Aeolus decided to help him return home. He gave Odysseus a magical leather bag containing every dangerous and unfavorable wind. Only the gentle west wind was left free to carry the ship safely toward Ithaca. For days, everything went perfectly. At last, the shores of Ithaca appeared on the horizon. Home was finally within reach. Exhausted after steering the ship for so many days without rest, Odysseus fell asleep. But while he slept, his curious crew began to wonder what was hidden inside the mysterious bag. Convinced that Aeolus had filled it with gold and precious treasures, they secretly opened it. In an instant, every imprisoned wind burst free. A violent storm erupted, driving the ships far away from Ithaca and back across the open sea. Their chance to return home had slipped through their fingers once again. When they returned to Aeolus seeking help, the wind god refused. Believing that the gods themselves had cursed Odysseus, Aeolus would no longer interfere with their fate. Once again, they were left alone to face the endless sea. Their next destination was the island of Circe, a powerful sorceress feared throughout the seas. When some of Odysseus's men explored the island, Circe welcomed them into her palace with food and wine. But it was a trap. With a single spell, she transformed them into pigs. When Odysseus learned what had happened, he set out alone to rescue his men. On his way, the messenger god Hermes appeared before him. Hermes handed Odysseus a magical herb called moly, a rare plant capable of protecting him from Circe's enchantments. Armed with the herb, Odysseus entered Circe's palace. She tried to cast the same spell on him. But to her surprise, it had no effect. Realizing she had met a man protected by the gods, Circe abandoned her hostility. Instead, she welcomed Odysseus as her guest and restored every one of his companions to human form. Odysseus and his crew remained on the island for an entire year, but eventually, Odysseus remembered the promise he had made to himself, to return home. Before they departed, Circe gave him one final piece of advice. She warned him that the road to Ithaca would be even more dangerous than anything he had faced before. If he wished to survive, he first had to journey into the underworld and seek the wisdom of the blind prophet Tiresias. Following Circe's instructions, Odysseus sailed to the edge of the world, where the entrance to the underworld was said to lie. There, he performed the sacred rituals exactly as Circe had instructed. Soon, the spirits of the dead began to emerge from the darkness. Among them was Tiresias, the blind prophet whose wisdom was respected even after death. Tiresias warned Odysseus that his journey home would be filled with even greater dangers. He also gave him one crucial warning. No matter what happened, neither he nor his men must harm the sacred cattle of Helios, the god of the sun. If they did, disaster would surely follow. With this prophecy in mind, Odysseus returned to his ship and continued his long voyage home. As they sailed onward, Odysseus and his crew approached one of the most dangerous places in the sea. It was the island of the Sirens. Their enchanting voices lured sailors toward the rocky shore where every ship was destroyed. Remembering Circe's warning, Odysseus ordered every man aboard to seal his ears with beeswax. But he himself wanted to hear the legendary song. He instructed his crew to tie him tightly to the ship's mast. No matter how desperately he begged, they were not to untie him. As the ship passed the island, the sirens began to sing. Their voices were more beautiful than anything Odysseus had ever heard. The song promised knowledge, glory, and every desire of the human heart. Driven almost mad, Odysseus struggled against the ropes and begged his men to release him. But they obeyed his orders and tightened the ropes even more. Moments later, the voices faded into the distance. Odysseus became the only mortal ever to hear the siren's song and live to tell the tale. The next challenge was even more terrifying. Ahead lay a narrow strait. On one side lurked Scylla, a monstrous creature with 6 long necks and 6 ravenous heads. On the other side waited Charybdis, a gigantic whirlpool powerful enough to swallow an entire ship. There was no safe path. Odysseus had to choose. If he sailed too close to Charybdis, everyone would die. If he passed near Scylla, only a few men would be lost. It was a heartbreaking decision. Odysseus steered toward Scylla. As the ship passed, the monster struck with terrifying speed, snatching 6 of his strongest companions from the deck. They disappeared forever. Odysseus could do nothing but watch. Sometimes, leadership means making the least terrible choice. After surviving countless dangers, Odysseus and his exhausted crew reached the island of Helios, the sun god. Odysseus remembered Tiresias's warning. He ordered his men not to touch the sacred cattle under any circumstances. For a while they obeyed. But when fierce storms trapped them on the island and their food ran out, hunger overcame their fear. While Odysseus slept, his men slaughtered the sacred cattle and feasted upon them. When Helios discovered what had happened, he demanded justice from Zeus. Not long after they left the island, Zeus unleashed a devastating thunderbolt upon their ship. The vessel was shattered. Every one of Odysseus's companions drowned beneath the waves. Only Odysseus survived. Alone in the endless sea, Odysseus drifted for days before finally washing ashore on the island of Calypso. The immortal nymph fell deeply in love with him. She offered him something no mortal had ever been given. If he stayed with her forever, she would grant him eternal life. But Odysseus refused. He did not long for immortality, he longed for home. For 7 long years, Calypso kept him on her island. Meanwhile, the goddess Athena watched over Odysseus and pleaded with Zeus to allow the weary king to return home. Zeus finally agreed. He sent Hermes to Calypso with a command from the gods. Though reluctant, Calypso had no choice but to let Odysseus go. She helped him build a small raft, and once again, he set sail toward Ithaca. While Odysseus struggled to survive at sea, things had grown worse back home in Ithaca. Believing that their king was dead, dozens of powerful nobles had taken over his palace. Day after day, they feasted on his food, wasted his wealth, and pressured his faithful wife, Penelope, to choose one of them as her new husband. But Penelope was just as clever as Odysseus. She promised the suitors that she would make her decision only after finishing a burial shroud for Odysseus's elderly father, Laertes. Every day she worked on the cloth. Every night she secretly unraveled everything she had woven. For years she delayed the inevitable, hoping that somehow her husband would return. At last, after 20 years away from home, Odysseus finally reached Ithaca. But Athena warned him that revealing himself too soon would be dangerous. Using her divine power, she disguised him as an old beggar so no one would recognize him. Odysseus first sought out his loyal swineherd, Eumaeus. Soon afterward, he was reunited with his son, Telemachus. For the first time in 20 years, father and son embraced. Together, they began planning how to reclaim their home. Back at the palace, Penelope announced one final challenge. Whoever could string Odysseus's legendary bow and shoot an arrow cleanly through the holes of 12 axe heads would become her husband. One after another, every suitor tried. Not a single one of them could even bend the mighty bow. Then, the old beggar quietly stepped forward. The room filled with laughter. The suitors mocked him. How could an old beggar succeed where the strongest warriors had failed? Without the slightest effort, Odysseus strung the bow, released the arrow, and with perfect accuracy, it passed through all 12 axe heads. In that single moment, everyone realized the truth. The beggar standing before them was Odysseus, the true king of Ithaca. The doors of the palace were locked. There would be no escape. Fighting side by side with Telemachus and a handful of loyal servants, Odysseus launched his final battle. After years of injustice, his home was finally his again. The king had returned. Yet one final challenge remained. After 20 long years, Penelope could hardly believe the man before her was truly her husband. She decided to test him. Calmly, she ordered one of the servants to move their marriage bed outside the bedroom. Odysseus immediately objected. No one can move that bed. I built it myself around the trunk of a living olive tree. Its roots are still buried deep in the earth. The bed had never been moved. At that moment, Penelope's doubts disappeared. After 20 years of war, storms, monsters, and endless suffering, they were finally together again. The story of Odysseus is far more than a tale of monsters and gods. It is a story about perseverance, loyalty, wisdom, and the unbreakable desire to return home. Although he wandered the seas for 10 long years, it was never his strength alone that carried him through. It was his intelligence, his patience, and his determination to never give up. Even today, we still use the word Odyssey to describe a long and difficult journey. Nearly 3,000 years after Homer first told this story, the legend of Odysseus continues to inspire people around the world. Because sometimes, the greatest victories are won not by the strongest warriors, but by the wisest ones.